Hello everyone, I am Melissa Lyon, Executive Director and Experience Designer at Hive Legal and member of the CLI Advisory Board, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here today to welcome you to the third of our live sessions for our Client Experience Day of the CLI ALTMA Innovation and Legal Tech Week. So today's session will focus very much on the next legal services product client, and we'll be really focusing on what that client looks like, what their attributes are, and really putting our heads together to work out a persona for that client. Before I introduce my fabulous panel, a couple of things. This session is being recorded. And we would really love to make this session as interactive as possible for you. We know we've got a lot of people here from a lot of different backgrounds, all different types of organisations, and we want to make the conversation as rich as possible. And while we might not hear you, we'll be able to see what you're saying. So can I ask you, first of all, to direct any questions that you have to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those questions as we go. So we'd really love, don't wait till the end, we'd really love to hear from you as we go through. The other thing is, and I really encourage people to do this, and in fact, I really want you to do this, can you please use the chat? Because it's a great way for us to gather more information that we can talk about as we go too. And it's a great way for you to connect with the other people that are watching this session live as well. So I'll be asking you for your input along the way. Please don't be scared to put it in there, because we'd love to gather that information as well. It will help us to have a really rich conversation and also to get some outputs at the end of it, which will be really handy and good. Now to my amazing panel. So can I introduce you first to Debra Filippin, Head of Business Development Asia Pacific at Pinsent Masons. Hi, Debra. Michael, oh, hi. Michael Morrissey, the Managing Director, Founder, Principal of Morrissey Law and Advisory. Thanks for joining us, Michael. Marlo Osborne-Smith, Director at New Law PwC.
Thanks, hi everyone.
Hi, Marlo. And Carolyn Reynolds, General Counsel, Vicinity Centres. Hi, Carolyn. Hi. And Carolyn will obviously be bringing the client voice to this, so thank you for joining us for that part of it, Carolyn. Okay, so what do we intend to cover in this session? For those of you who have had the benefit who have been attend the live sessions this week has really been designed and built in a way that culminates with this session. So on the first day, we looked at transformation and change and leading those changes, looking at mindsets and different ways of thinking about how we deliver our services, what our clients look like, all of that different type of thinking. The next day, we looked at the business model structures, the legal ecosystem, how it's much broader than we probably think when we think about all those participants in it, and it's not just law firms. So the next day, yesterday, looking at people and the role that people play, looking at the roles that we see that are broadening in the legal ecosystem, different skill sets. It's not just now legal expertise, it's all of those other business professionals who can bring great value to their clients. Today, Client Experience Day, much more about clients and their experiences, but really blending in from all of those other things that we've talked about through the week. And this morning we heard about social media, and then later on this afternoon around the client experience and giving clients a great experience and what we need to do that way. Now we can actually apply all those things and think about what that client is going to look like in the future. We're going to do that. We're going to build that persona with your help as well, please. And then we're going to look at the reasons why we think that's the case. What are the trends that are happening? Where do we see those changes happening? Also, who's going to drive that change? Because once again, if we look at the legal ecosystem, it really is broadening from that perspective. And then we're going to look at how legal services, what the legal services are, how they can be delivered differently. And then moving on to different ways of working and how that's changing the way that we're delivering our clients' services, and then ending up with the good old predictions. So those of you who have the crystal ball, please get ready, because we'd love some predictions from you as well. So let's get started with our panel, and I'm going to start with you, Debra. So let's jump straight into building that persona, and really think about what are the main attributes? What are the attributes to the client that we're going to see in 2030? And can I also put the challenge out there to people in the chat to start throwing out some of their ideas from that perspective as well?
Thanks, Mel. I think I have a long list of them, but I think I'll focus on data or data, depending on what part of the world you're from. I do think that data has become increasingly important over the last, say, decade. We've always had data in some form, but I think that we will really start to use that data for the benefit of the client. We won't just be looking at things internally going, oh, that's interesting, what a trend there. We'll actually take things to the client and say, we've noticed this, so how about we look at changing that for you? And I think we'll just use that data, which has become so rich lately, in a better way for the client.
Fantastic. Thank you. Michael, can I call on you?
Of course. I guess, yeah. I was turning my mind, I guess, to what that demographic is going to look like, and where we're sitting once we hit 2030, we're going to be having not just the millennials will be, starting to fall a bit past their use by date by then as well. Gen Z, they'll be hitting their early to mid 30s. They'll be the decision makers. So we're looking at a demographic that isn't just digital natives. They're a generation that, we joke in our workplace about CDs to iTunes. These are going to be people that grew up with Spotify and only Netflix. So, we're looking at a demographic that consumes material in a fundamentally different way to what we have been. And, they're going to know things and be experiencing things and have grown up doing things with a very different approach to what we have, and that's going to be a bigger divide to, I think, what we've seen between millennials and Gen X and the boomers sitting before that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that way that it's something obviously for us to think about, the way that we deliver the services and the way that they're going to be received. Fantastic. Carolyn, attributes from you about what the client's going to look like?
I think that clients are going to be more focused on value, and by value I mean not the way that law firms talk about it at the moment, because I think when law firms talk about value billing now, unfortunately it's still anchored in the hourly rate. How is the hourly rate derived? What does a partner want to earn? Work out how much they need to charge per hour to achieve that over the course of a 12-month period and X number of possible billable hours. We really need to get back to fundamentals and not have that be the driver of what is the determinant of value. And I think the clients will become more vocal about what is value for them, particularly as we enter a period where there will be economic constraints and a tightening of belts. We fully anticipate that will flow through to client budgets in terms of external legal spend, not just internal legal spend. And that will put some pressure on the external market to actually change the way they think about, what is an income that's acceptable? What is the way that we actually determine how we charge, etc., and bring it back to more fundamentals. And the other trend I think that will become more prevalent is a closer relationship between clients and their external firms, with more true collaboration, as opposed to it being, we're just going to push this piece of work out the door for you and wait for you to send us their response. Very much a collaborative relationship, looking for solutions, picking up on the data point that Debra made earlier.
Fantastic. I'm liking the sound of this client already. Marlo, what do you think?
Someone asked, is the billable hour gone? Gosh, I hope so.
Great. Maybe we can carry that conversation on a bit when we're talking about trends a bit later on. Fantastic. Marlo.
Thanks, Mel. So I've been thinking about it from a geographic perspective, and I think one thing that became very obvious to us during COVID was that at one point we were very concerned about how we would convince a client to use us remotely. This whole idea of doing workshops in the office and meeting and catching up and being physically in the same place, it became sort of almost overnight that it became apparent to us and to our clients that you can absolutely deliver work from anywhere in the world. So for me, the 2030 client is increasingly borderless, and this whole concept of hybrid office models, which I'm sure has come up in the context of your sessions this week. People won't be physically located in the office. People will be working from home. I think, if the concept of a 9-to-5 office hours was gone some time ago just because of the pressures that in-house legal teams face, this now all roles flex people working from home. The the standard hours, the standard location of the office is very different now. But I think the other thing that's becoming apparent when we speak to clients is that as the work, and Carolyn talked about this, more collaborative between client and provider, I think as the work continues to disaggregate, unbundle, fragment, that we're finding that increasingly there are parts of that legal transactional matter that is, it's not legal, so it could be done from anywhere really in the world. So whilst we still continue to have a need to work together with clients in a location by virtue of practicing certificates and regulation, I think we'll start to see more parts of that transaction that are not legal and can be performed really anywhere.
Absolutely. I think, the fact that we're sitting here now and we've had some, global guests in the week that we've had this week just shows that we can be thankful for some things out of COVID too, that the ability now to communicate the way that we are, but it really does increase that opportunity for collaboration and hopefully collaboration between clients and the service providers as well.
I think the only other thing I was going to say too, Mel, is picking up on one of the comments in the chat there around purpose and social impact. I think we were just on a client call this morning, on a whole of firm client call about a large financial services client. And we were just talking about how do we make our engagement with that client more purpose-led, particularly outside of paid engagements. And we were talking about how PwC's purpose is actually very aligned with the client's purpose, and how do we change the dialogue around purpose. And I think from my discussions with the millennials in our team, that purpose and social impact is, very high on their radar. So in terms of engaging employees and things, that would be really important too.
Yeah, and perhaps if I could just comment on that, Marlo, that is some work that we're doing within the team here at Vicinity to take another look at purpose within the legal team. And just to explain, my team encompasses not just legal, but also risk, safety, compliance, retail list transactions, etc. And finding that thing that binds us all together and connects us. The other thing that we have found is that there is this real hunger to make that social impact and contribute to causes. So in part, we're trying to find some flexibility around how we can free the team up to be able to pursue those passions and engage with causes that are really meaningful for them and fulfill that need that I think most of us as lawyers feel to give back, given the privileged position that we occupy.
Yeah, and absolutely agree with that. Obviously, there are stats around purpose-driven organisations being more successful, but the other point that I'd love to make here is that connection between employee experience and client experience too, so important, and that idea of what we've been discussing, an aligned purpose can just really improve that experience for both, and I think that's something that's much more needed in our industry. Something else that's come up really interestingly in the chat is improving physical and mental health too. That the 2030 client is probably going to be focusing on that. Have you got any thoughts around that? Happy for anyone to jump in.
It's been a big focus for us, particularly during the working from home, the whole dividing time between personal and work, and the fact that that line has been very blurred as we've worked from home, particularly in Victoria. So it's been sort of high on our radar, mental health, and checking in with clients just to see how they're going as well in that environment.
Absolutely. Great. Interesting. I'm going to ask this question now, Carolyn, because I think it does come up with what you were saying along collaboration between client and the service provider. Can you expand a bit on that and maybe give some examples?
Yeah, so I know we've got a question that's come up in the chat about collaboration actually working between the client and the service provider, and can we give concrete examples? And I'm happy to share one from our organisation, which is, we are for those who don't know us, we are a shopping centre landlord. We currently have 60-something shopping centres around the country. And as you can imagine, we have multiple tenancies across those shopping centres. The way that our what we call the stream leasing work, which are those less bespoke deals, is serviced is we have that divided between two firms. And one thing we were seeing was that there was a conflict in the way that the two firms were approaching, the drafting of the correspondence, timeframes and responses, etc., etc. And from the tenant perspective, but also to make things easier for us as an organisation, we needed for there to be a consistent approach. And we we spoke to each of the firms individually and said to them, we're going to set you a series of tasks. For example, look at this particular letter that gets sent to tenants at the outset of a matter, and we want you to agree a standard form that you will both use, and then come to us and we will give you our feedback on it, and we will come up with an agreed format that you are both going to use. Now, that was completely antithetical to them. That wasn't a way that they had worked previously. I will say that one of the firms was more open to it than the others. It took a bit of time and some real commitment of effort by both of the lead partners to actually achieve what we wanted. But I think that was a good example of us being very clear about what our expectation was of them and how they would behave and how they would collaborate with each other and with us. And we have worked through all of those documents and all of those processes. Everything is now consistent, and it just makes things so much easier for my team.
Great example. Michael, I might just ask you this way. One of the other things that's come up in the chat too is that expectation around speed and delivery and the use of digital channels. So similar to your point around being communicating in different ways in the future, do you think that that's going to be an expectation of clients, increased speed?
I think it ties in really well with the follow-up question. I think it's speed against the product. So there's certain things that are going to be expected to be put out fast in a good way, and clients know that. A lot of it's going to come down to that. We're talking about collaboration, but you know that communication with the client. And Mel, I know you've talked about that for a long, long time now, and we
can talk about it more.
I mean, it's about understanding what services can be delivered fast using whether it's a multitude of platforms. You know, as a small firm, we're often asked, "Are we best placed to do it?" And we often say no, and we refer out or collaborate with another firm to do that. But clients, we find, are getting more sophisticated and understand the product that they're asking for, and having a conversation, helping them identify some of those really do require a lot of legwork, and the speed can't be matched by what they're actually after. Other things, yes, they can be and should be delivered fast. Clients are able to work that out pretty quickly at the moment. I think they're only going to get increasingly sophisticated in that respect, Mel.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, look, I think we're getting an idea of what that client's looking like. So, you know, data-driven, obtaining their information in different ways, in different platforms, really focusing on value, collaborating, working, you know, across globally as well, without those silos that we've had before, or those borders that we've had before, purpose-led, looking at the employee experience and that type of thing, which is, you know, really starting to pull together what the client will look like. I've got a couple more that come up too, and I'd love to share these. So Catherine has suggested value and also value authenticity. Sort of, I suppose, connected to the purpose side of things as well. Would someone like to comment on that?
Do you want me to field that one?
Sure.
I think authenticity is, to my mind, the same as, you know, easy to work with and someone who I enjoy working with. And those tend to be the people who, you know, tell it to me straight, don't try to sell me the dream when really it's just you know, there's no dream. And, you know, those are the people who I want to do business with. You know, there are a number of lawyers out there who have excellent reputations for pieces of work or particular types of work. But the people I choose to work with are the people who I feel value the relationship with us as a client, value my input or the input of members of my team, because I do have an experienced team of excellent lawyers, which is the case for most in-house teams now. And the people who make me look good in front of my clients, because I might be their client, but ultimately I have a series of clients across the business, and the person I'm going to go to is the person who makes me look good, doesn't make me look stupid in front of, you know, my board or my CEO or whoever it might be.
Fantastic.
Again, I was on a conference call this morning with a partner in the US, and this partner had grown a client relationship, and this is, you know, obviously a very different market to Australia, but she'd grown this client relationship from US 15 million to US 200 million in revenue in a 3-year period. We were talking to her about how she'd been so successful. And one of the things she said is that she's got to a point with her main relationship contact at that firm that they are on text message terms with each other and that they very much have each other's back. And she said, as soon as something happens in my organisation or I get wind of anything that's slightly concerning, even though it might not reflect particularly well on us as an organisation, she said, the first thing I do once I've sort of checked that this is actually happening is I get on the phone, on the text of this person, and I let them know that we have an issue and there's something that she needs to be aware of, because it's all about, as Carolyn said, making her look good, being, communicating openly, not thinking about, selfish reason not to call her, but just to really have that open and transparent relationship. And I thought that was really refreshing to hear.
That raises a really interesting point, and I'd like to just pursue it before we jump off building this persona. But there are going to be different expectations, possibly for the different levels of services. And Debra, I'd love to hear your view on this. So we talk about those very special relationships where we know we want those people-to-people relationships in the delivery of those services. And then to Michael's point around the types of other products that we might have delivered and that type of thing. Do you see that there are going to be different considerations and different types of clients from those perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm still pondering the mental health piece, and that's connected with the authenticity piece and the whole idea of client and law firm almost like colleagues, because that's, we'll get to this at one point, but I do think that 2030 will be about law firms and clients, or legal industry and clients, just acting like colleagues rather than service provider and law firm or legal service provider. And I think hearing about the authenticity and connecting that to humanity, and really what we've seen over the last 12 months is we want to work with people that we like. We want to work with people who understand us, who deliver needs, and who just deliver the services in a way that we expect. And sometimes that can be about speed. Sometimes, well, always that's about accuracy and the right level of advice. But I think there's going to be some conflict there in terms of speed is so important right now and has been for some time. And if anything, I'd argue is the problem that law firms particularly face with mental health. There is so much pressure to get things done. There's just timelines that are just unrealistic. And my own firm has implemented a mindful business charter, and I think we all know what that is, so I won't explain the concept. But what's really challenging with that is internally we get that philosophically and we try to adhere to it, and yet there are people internally saying, well, how do you manage that with clients though? If clients want something turned around really quickly, do you let them go? And I think there's going to be this question we have to answer around that, because the people of the future firm that Michael talked about, they want balance. They want to have a life. They don't want to be working ridiculous hours. They might do that for some time, but they're not going to be doing that ongoing. We can already see those patterns. So I think it's about, there'll be different clients wanting different things, and law firms or legal service providers will have to say, we can't deliver that because it doesn't align with our purpose and our strategies. And they'll pass it to someone that might be able to do that. But I think fundamentally, the legal industry will be challenged with this notion of, mental health is not getting better in the industry. It's getting much worse. COVID has proven that. And something has to be done around that. How do we deliver services in a way that we're all human and we're all bringing that humanity to the service being offered?
I loved your point, Debra, around that, that idea of the ecosystem, if I can put it that way, working as colleagues. In a way, and we'll come to this a bit later on, but the structures that we have traditionally had, where we've got firms, in-house clients, education, legal education, it's all very siloed in the way that we work. I think those silos are being broken down. But to your point around that working together, and if I can just maybe ask your views on this too, Carolyn, value, we talk about purpose and we can have aligned purposes, but values are very important in terms of the alignment between our clients and service providers as well. Do you see that as a priority?
Just reflecting on that for a moment and going back to a couple other things that Debra said, and reflecting on, my expectations and demands on service providers. And it goes back to the points I made previously about those relationships that you have of, openness and trust with the people who you work with a lot. And, I know that from time to time, we will have agreed I'll give 2 examples. So, you know, when you've agreed a particular deadline with someone, but they're upfront with you and say, we just can't achieve that. Is this something that would work for you in the business? I'm perfectly happy to have that conversation because, you know, I have a decent sense of how long it's going to take to do something, but I don't know what else you've got on or what other pressures you've got, et cetera, et cetera. So I welcome those conversations because I don't believe in burning out my service providers unnecessarily. And, you know, occasionally there are times when something is ridiculously urgent and important and just has to get done quickly. And those are the hard deadlines, but those things don't come up too often. Royal Commissions and their own ridiculous deadlines will put those in a special category. And maybe that's something that needs to be considered more holistically, because I think what we saw from the Hayne Royal Commission were, you know, unrealistic timeframes, people getting burnt out, etc. But that was driven by the Commission. That wasn't the clients or the, you know, the service providers. The other point I wanted to make, though, is what drives me mental, and this is both in my personal life and when I'm expecting advice from someone and it doesn't turn up and we have to chase it. You know, recently I had an experience with a person who's meant to be doing a decent sized project at my house who just wasn't giving me an update on timing, and I knew it had been affected by COVID, and all he had to do was ring and tell me, it's been affected by COVID, here's when it's going to be, instead of just not returning calls, not responding to emails, etc. So, you know, those are the 2 perspectives I want to share. Yeah. And to say that I think as clients, sometimes we are responding to internal pressures, and perhaps we need to have the courage as clients to speak to our own clients internally and say, is this really when you need it? Or are you just doing this for some other purpose, which is really not that important? So that everyone is operating under a set of circumstances where if it is really urgent, then it gets treated that way. But we're not calling things urgent when they're not. And I think there's a lot of that goes on, and it's linked with, you know, importance syndrome and all sorts of other things that we could delve into for hours.
Absolutely. And that alignment of expectations between the service provider and clients, obviously mega important in terms of a good client experience. We'll move on to the next one, but before I do, I'd just like to say Mary has suggested that the client in the future will know, like, and trust. And I think that they're really good, 3 really good things to think about in terms of that, those great relationships that can have in a great client experience. Okay, well, we might move on to the next part. So we've got a fairly good idea of the things that the client is going to value in the future and that type of thing. So let's have a bit of a discussion now about why we know that that's going to be the case and what we can see happening. So let's really think about, you know, the trends that we're seeing already. And if I can go to you, Marlo, and first, and I'd love to hear from the chat, what do you think is happening here? What other industries do you think are having an impact on the changes within the legal profession and what we might see the 2030 client looking like?
Thanks, Mel. I think I've worked in private practice for most of my time in legal, and I think one of the things that was attractive for me coming to PwC was the ability to sort of have access to different relationships within corporates. And I think one thing that I found particularly interesting that I hadn't thought through in a lot of detail before I joined was just what we could learn from those other corporate enabling functions. So what IT and finance and HR and tax have been through previously. And, you know, we talk a lot about how legal tech has followed fintech and how it's miles behind fintech, but there are many things when I think about the approaches that we as a new law team have to our clients around people and process and technology. And I look at how PwC have worked with other corporate support functions such as IT and tax and finance. I think there's been some really interesting things that we've learned from that. And you touched on earlier that one of the sessions earlier this week was around change and change management. And, you know, from my perspective, that's just so fundamental to any project and any engagement with clients is managing stakeholders and the change. So we learn a lot about that. Picking up on Deb's point, you know, just the importance of data and metrics and using that, you know, as the clients themselves using that to have better conversations with their business and, you know, and to make better decisions. You know, typically legal haven't used that data and metrics very well, and we're doing a lot of work in that space at the moment. Whereas we've seen other functions, finance, HR, tax, using those metrics and that data to have a much better conversation with their business around return on investment and other things. So I think there's lots of things we can learn from those functions in corporates who have been on the journey a bit earlier than us, because we have been slow and special in the past.
Absolutely. And I'm going to throw to Debra without notice here. In terms of other industries, I mean, obviously firms often have the sector approaches where we're looking at what's happening with our clients and that type of thing. But I think sometimes we miss the mark and we're just concentrating on the legal aspects of those sectors. Do you see where we can learn from other industries in terms of how we can change the way we're working?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always, I've worked in law firms for as long as I can remember. And I think the thing that really bugs me is the internal structure, the practice group structure that is so very siloed and so very internal and makes absolutely no sense to the market. So when I joined Pinsent Masons, I was very refreshed at interview when I heard that we're a sector focused firm. And I was like, oh yeah, here we go. But it's actually quite true. We have 5 sectors and that's how we market. We market in sectors. And I think what I've seen is the firm really trying to flip that whole internal thing to be more external, where we have to think about where the clients are operating rather than how we operate. And I think it's such a basic one, but if you actually abolish a practice group structure, I think the clients would be looking at firms or the whole industry and going, wow, finally, okay, so now let's talk about strategy. Now let's talk about our business needs. Almost just reducing all your IP and your tech and your this. Like, we have to just start thinking beyond the disciplines. And I think, back to your question, so I'm not really answering it, is other industries have done this very well, and we need to look at this. Even though we say, no, we're special, like Marlo said, we're special and we're law, like this is the reason that law firms haven't changed for so long, is because we think that we're not like other industries. We are absolutely going to fall prey to all of the changes that have happened to the medical industry, to other industries, which I won't go through, but this is where, if we don't change, this is problematic. And 2030, we'll see a lot of firms just disappear because of just the antiquated ways in which we are facing clients. And I think that's the fundamental thing that needs to change in order for us to start talking their language. Almost like abolish everything internally that we've done for decades and be more client facing and ask a client how we'd structure the firm. Because I'm pretty sure they'd be able to tell us, do this, and you'll see lots more work come to you if you do that.
You're speaking my language now. Just completely redesign a firm so that it's actually for client needs and the people who work in it. Go for it, Carol.
One thing that I think astonishes me is that you can become a partner of a law firm without ever actually having spent time working at a client. And I think that should be a prerequisite, that you have done, a significant chunk of time actually working in a client environment, because how can you know what the pressures are on a client and how to service a client unless you've actually spent some time with a client? And by that I don't mean, providing legal advice to the same client for 15 years. I mean, actually getting in there and seeing how it works in the real world. And, I've had experiences of, being at law firm lunches and hearing people talk about, well, why don't you just do this? And wanting to scream and say, that's not how it works. And you'd know that if you'd actually spent some time, out of your office and actually, getting your hands dirty and seeing what we deal with on a day-to-day basis, because it's very different to what you think, how you think it operates.
And from that perspective, it's not necessarily just from the point of view the provision of the advice that needs to take into account, but how it's delivered and the way that you're going to use that advice once you have it, or could it be that it goes out to the rest of the company or whatever. It's as simple as that, isn't it? Thinking really from the perspective of the client and making sure that you're hitting the mark there. Michael, keen to know from you then too, in terms of what you think we can learn from other industries and where you can see that there might be some opportunities to do things differently.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a lot of what Debra and Carolyn were saying. Like, we need to take the opportunity to put, to start to wear their shoes. We've kind of sat over the top of a lot of the industries we work with and tried to shout down at them what they should be doing. a lot of them actually, already have an innovation mindset. We do a lot of work in the construction sector and with emerging businesses. And some of the things they're implementing when you spend a day or week sitting internally with them are, they move faster. Their decision trees are a lot better than what law firms do. The way they speak to each other, it's often a lot more of a flat structure. The way they learn from each other is very different. So, I'm speaking, most of my clients are in energy, infrastructure, transport. They have to move fast. They're businesses that don't get the flex that the billable hour has allowed lawyers to sort of be a bit lazy around. They're trying to work out how they make money, how they share information in the quickest possible way. I really think what Carolyn said was really, really poignant. You have to spend some time with the people you're working for. And I think it's turning your mind to, you're working alongside these people, and you need to understand what they want and how they do things. And of reading the chat as people were speaking, I think Verity made some really useful comments like, use visuals, work out the way that people actually want to digest that information. I was sitting down recently with a couple. One's a very senior lawyer in a law firm, and his partner's a general counsel. It was a very interesting discussion over a glass of wine as to what form the advice should take. It's really, that's in the same household, and people are talking about problems in a very different way. So yeah, we have to be prepared to actively listen to what clients are after and learn from what their industries are doing and go, great, that's good, let's do it.
Yeah, and I'll chip in here with my view too. I think sometimes we think we can only learn from other professions or that type of thing. But I mean, there are so many amazing stories in other sectors. Like, I mean, even, like the restaurant sector. I mean, I don't know whether anyone's seen it. I'm going to do the movie about McDonald's, and when they were setting up the McDonald's, how they were going to work, they called it the symphony of efficiency, and they'd actually literally set up what the kitchen would look like, and they'd move things around so that they could be efficient with the way that they move things around. I mean, why can't we do that? We can take those ideas from other industries and other ways of working and apply them to the way that we work in our industry as well. I just think we need to be so much more broad-minded in terms of how we've done it. Verity's point around the visuals is really great too, to really, because often as lawyers we tend to be looking at the text and the figures or the words rather than really using the visuals. And obviously legal design is a great method for doing that, but we're not here to talk about legal design. So fantastic. I'm going to stay with you, Michael, now too, because I'd love to know from you what trends you see in the changing ways of working. And we did touch on this before, but what, in terms of the different ways that we're working, COVID obviously plays into this, but obviously there was a lot of change beforehand as well. How are they going to make a difference to what the 2030 client looks like?
I think we've learned very quickly, and that you can be remote, you can be regional, you can be doing a lot of really cool things from places that aren't within a 10-kilometre radius of a metropolitan CBD. But I mean, the biggest, I suppose, the question we've been talking through most of this, and Marlo started touching on it. I think we haven't quite worked out how to we've kind of swung everyone's at home at the moment and loving being at home, but that wellbeing piece, I don't know how we're going to get that balance right between how we're going to work and how we look after ourselves in the same process. Look, we found a lot of our team, we're in New South Wales, so we've had, we were able to go back a lot earlier than I appreciate everyone in Melbourne was, but we've spoken to a lot of businesses and they've gone back to the office really early because people needed that. They needed that interaction. They needed that that coffee, that banter over a coffee. They needed to be in the same space as someone again. And then they start to do that and then they miss going home. So trying to work out how to get that balance right for working, I think is probably going to be the big challenge. And working out where that off switch button is. And I mean, that's going to come down to a lot of really proactive communication and then forced discipline to get there. And maybe Gen Z will be better at it than what we have been. But yeah, it's a really difficult question at the moment, Mel, because I think we've swung so hard to working at home and then going, oh, how do we ever switch off from work or switch off from our home life? And then we go back to the office and fall into bad habits again. And we've found probably the people that do that best in our team are, you know, the 21-year-olds. You know, maybe because they're closer to their uni days and they know how to have fun outside of doing work. But a lot of our senior lawyers, particularly those that are young parents, the balance has been extraordinarily difficult. So I think gives us 10 years to work it out between now and 2030, but we need to look after a lot of people in the meantime.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. What I've been saying along these lines is we've got, I think, a fantastic opportunity to redesign the way that we work. And COVID has brought us to that crisis point where we've got the opportunity to do it. And people probably heard me say this often, but my fear is that we'll just go back to pre-COVID, or we'll just look at the Band-Aid approaches that we took during COVID to then apply them. But I think that there's this opportunity to really redesign and look at how we can work better. Throw it open to others in the panel. Can you see how those changing ways of working are going to impact what our client looks like in 2030?
I'm happy to jump in back to the point around the colleagues point that I made with working with clients more like colleagues rather than provider and client. And I think what it looks like in terms of whether it's in the office or whether it's at home, I think that's where firms have to be really flexible and fluid around it. And I say that because the last year, what I've seen very interestingly is that when we were all in lockdown, there was definitely a more senior people trying to get back in the office. We need to get back in the office. And, you know, younger people were like, no, this is cool, I'm working from home. And then that almost flipped, where younger people now are saying, we need the mentoring, we need all the guidance, we want to be back in the office. And yet the more senior people who have, you know, probably their own office and have gotten quite used to working from home. So I think there's definitely the change that's happening between where people want to work, how they want to work. And I think that when it comes to clients, what I envisage is client might just say, hey, do you want to come into the office with me and we'll meet in there and we'll have our meeting, then you go back home. I actually think that will be the norm. There'll be almost the redesign will be each individual will design it themselves. And no one will know where they've worked on that one day. That they'll only know that someone spent time at an office. That might be the client's office, it might be their office, but it will all be so fluid that it won't actually matter. And it won't be something that you talk about. It won't be, well, I spent this many hours at this client and therefore billed that many hours at this client. It'll just be, this was my working day today. And that whole piece around colleagues will be really, really in focus. So yeah, in terms of redesign, I don't think firms are going to have to come down with it, like in the form of a policy, or this is what we think you should do, or there might be some guidance on that, but it's like, you get your work done and we'll be happy. And I hope it's as simplistic as that. I really do, because we are adults and we all know how to do this. We've proven that productivity has not decreased during this period. Maybe it has for some, but the majority of people have just gotten on with it, and if anything are working way more hours than they were working in the office. So yeah, back to the redesign point, it will definitely be left to the individual, I think.
Yeah,
that's a good point, Deb. I was going to say I agree with you in terms of that flip from senior people wanting to be back in and juniors, and I do worry about just how we maintain that team culture with juniors who haven't really experienced, who may have started just before COVID or during COVID. How do we train them, mentor them, support them? You know, that coffee room banter that bonds a team, and how you sort of manage to do that when you're not all in the office at the same time.
Yeah, and look, to give an example, I went into the office last week, which was very strange after months of not being there, and I expected to see a mix of, you know, partners and more junior lawyers. It was only junior people, but there were no partners there. So I thought, well, how's that going to work? Because if you've got all the juniors sitting in there seeking that guidance and there's no senior people in there, then, you know, something has to be done where you do arrange it in the morning, where you say, hey, I'm going in today. It'd be good if you and X could come into, and then, you know, it'll all just happen, I guess, organically. That's what I'm expecting.
So just to chip in from the client perspective, I don't care where the work's done from, provided the work is done. And, you know, we also welcome our service providers who want to spend some time with us at the office, because we think that by, you know, sitting with the team for a bit of time, you get to meet people, and you also get, even in a very small way, to see, you know, what we do and how we operate. And just going back to your point, Deborah, about not seeing the partners in the office, I think for a lot of partners, you know, they move into these leadership roles, but they don't have a concept of what it means to be a leader. And I think that is something that law firms really need to focus on, because being a leader in a law firm is not just about dragging in work and pumping out billable hours and shouting at junior lawyers. It's actually about leading by example, role modelling, and understanding that part of the job is that teaching and sharing of knowledge and experience. So some work to be done there, I think.
Yeah.
Carolyn, do you think that there's been a change, you know, in terms of that preparedness to come in and work in the office and spend time with you, you know, physically in the office and things? Are people a bit sort of nervous about that? I feel like we've sort of developed this I don't know, way of working during COVID where we have become very remote to each other, and I'm not sure yet whether we've sort of got to a point where we're comfortable sort of ringing and saying, hey, I'd love to come and work in your office today, or I'd love to come and see you for a coffee. I feel like it's a lot more sort of formal than it used to be.
I'm still working on trying to get my team comfortable with coming back into the office a day a week. So I'll start with that and then I'll move on to my service providers.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to cover off on a couple of things that have been asked in the chat, going back before to some concrete examples from Danny's asked for around what we can learn from other service providers, and I'd like to sort of talk about that sort of thing now. So, look, a concrete example I can give around that is something that we did at Hive. So if we were looking in a traditional mindset of how what a document might look like, and here I'm talking about privacy policies, it could just be text. We were inspired by work that was being done in the digital area, and worked with a graphic design agency and produced an animated privacy policy. It involves text, but it also has an animation and a story that goes with it. Now, that inspiration has come from a different place than a profession or the legal profession. And what we were doing was looking at how other service providers were connecting with their clients and really thinking outside the square. So hopefully, Danny, that gives you a more of a concrete example of how we can be inspired outside our own industry to do things a bit differently. That's a great conversation. Thank you. And we might move on to now focusing on the client experience. And I would like to hear a bit more from you, Carolyn, around the pricing, and we will talk about the pricing side of things and what you see the trends are that could mean that our client has different expectations in 2030 around pricing.
Sure. I think it goes back to, you know, one of the points I made earlier, which is around, you know, the rise of the in-house team. And I don't see that as a trend that's going to slow down or stop. I think that increasingly more and more work will be able to be done in-house. And there's obviously a pricing differential with that because it costs much less for my organisation, for example, for us to do a lot of the work internally rather than to brief it out. So where we do brief out tends to be on areas where, you know, we don't have the expertise or where we're short on resources, we've got a spike in work, et cetera, et cetera. In particular, with our volume-based work, some of that work I referred to earlier, we expect that work in that space will be on a fixed fee basis and that the firms will work out for themselves, and we're reasonable about what those fees are, let's be honest about that. But we expect the firms to work out internally how they resource it, how they time record. So for example, one of our firms has gotten rid of timesheets altogether for that type of work. It doesn't make sense for them given that it's a fixed fee arrangement, but it's for them to determine how they manage the work across those matters, and we give a sufficient volume that it swings and roundabouts. So one matter might take more time, but other matters will take less time. What we became very frustrated with was always being asked for more money for the ones that took more time, but not being given money back for the ones that took less time. Makes no sense from our perspective. So we moved to a complete fixed fee model. I think we'll see more areas of work where clients are expecting that fixed fee with no variations, where it is repeatable work with a sufficient volume, etc. But I think what clients increasingly will start to say is, I am not prepared to pay a price that is driven by your income expectations as opposed to the value that I think you are delivering to me, because that is completely the wrong way around. You shouldn't be starting with, I want to earn $2 million a year, therefore that means my hourly rate is blob. What am I worth? What is my expertise worth? How does it compare to other professionals? Because if I become too expensive, all that will happen is that we will hire more lawyers internally, and the work that we brief out will become narrower, 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 and much more specialised. Or it'll be when we've got something horrible or urgent that we need to deal with, say we get involved in a royal commission, fingers crossed that never happens, or it will be that very fixed fee churn type of work. And I'm not sure that's really where law firms want things to go, but inevitably, if we keep going with these, escalating hourly rates, clients will at a point say enough.
And does that comes back to your point, Carolyn, initially around the value. So what value are we right. getting to? Yeah. Sorry, Marlo, you were going to say
No, I was just going to say, and exactly on that point, we've been doing a lot of work with clients around the relative value of work, and looking at all the sort of work that comes into the legal department and sort of breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down. And I'm interested, Carolyn, whether in thinking about how you're resourcing the work, whether there are things that are being done in the legal department that you start to think are potentially non-legal and could be done by other people, non-lawyers. So whether you'd change and Mel, you've talked about this as well, just the change in the legal ecosystem, not just lawyers, but other people coming into the corporate legal department who may not be a lawyer, who may perform tasks that don't necessarily need a legal brain to do or a legal qualification to do. So are you exploring that as well, Carolyn?
Look, to a large extent, we're already there because most of our leasing work is done by non-lawyers. We have a cohort of lawyers who provide support to that team as and when required, but mostly they're paralegals who don't have a legal qualification. They're highly skilled and experienced and knowledgeable, but they don't have a legal qualification, and that's not required. We also have a group of what we call corporate paralegals who, where it's more low value, low risk work. Again, they are experienced paralegals. We also bring in a number of law students to work in that team as part of their ongoing development. And, work that doesn't require the application of the knowledge of an experienced lawyer goes to that team, again, with appropriate oversight as and when required. So we're always looking for opportunities to do the work differently. We've introduced some more self-service options. So, for example, competition terms and conditions. That was something that was taking up a lot of time for the legal team, and it's the sort of work where there's an element of risk because you need to keep up to date with what the regulation is, but it's not particularly rewarding work for the people who are doing it. So we implemented an online solution, and it's very rare that anything is dealt with outside of that online solution. So I think, as, for example, Anna Lazinski says a lot, you need to look for these different ways to treat different types of work and make sure that the work that is being done by the in-house lawyers is that strategic, interesting, high value work rather than the high turnover, repeated type of work, which can be done in a different way.
So leading on from that, I think, and I'm going to bring up this trend that I see that I think is going to really make a difference to what our client looks like in the future, is that whole idea of multidisciplinary skills and people coming in that aren't necessarily lawyers. I'm not going to use the non-lawyer word. People who aren't lawyers, who have great skills that can be brought to solve the client's solve the client's problem in a more holistic way, and that very, very much a broadening of legal services. And I am going to link it back to the point around the billable hour too, because what I think we do as a profession is we put that ring around. We can charge for legal advice, but you can't charge for everything else that comes with it, which devalues what actually comes with it. And I think that the profession works against itself then in terms of providing the client with the experience and the outcomes that they need, put simply. So obviously value pricing at our firm rather than the billable hour, and that is very much focused on value. So be interested to hear from you, Michael. Do you, and I noticed that your firm is Morrissey Legal, I think, and Advisory. So I'm keen to hear your views around that expanding of what legal services actually means.
Yeah, so that was me when I set up the firm going, okay, I want to be able to be more engaged in the business. And as soon as you add a different word in front of it, clients reacted differently from day one. So, you know, we're engaged more in a lot of their commercial components of their business and talking through and spending time with them. And we've got a few people in our team and sort of they're not legally trained. They landed on the title #not a lawyer, but at the bottom of their signatures. And clients probably like them a lot more than they like some of us. But, you know, they come from a visual communication background, for example. Once we get pigeonholed as lawyers, we don't get given a full picture. And that's something that I've always found pretty concerning. You get thrown a fire or, you know, even a transaction in isolation, and you can't add real value a lot of the time. And that's something, so, you know, getting the client to the point where they can see there's other people that might be around you, and they might be other businesses, to be honest. Like sometimes it's about calling in the friends and collaborating to try and work out what those solutions are going to look like. But, you know, if we're just looking at things in discrete components, one, the client can't see what value lawyers can bring. And lawyers are really bad at seeing what value they're bringing when they're just looking at something that's really discrete as well. They just start to think, I'm worth $700 an hour, without actually turning their mind to what that looks like from the client's perspective, or what they're actually trying to achieve against the project. So, you know, we threw the words advisory on there with the intention, hopefully that broadens our ability to be asked questions that aren't just what's the legal perspective on that. That's kind of where it landed. So we've got a few. So yeah, we've brought in people that, you know, have some project management experience or have visual communication, and a few of them landed #not a lawyer, and that makes clients smile. But it also means they're inclined to use those people to help with certain services as well.
Great. Debra, keen for your views on that too.
Yeah, I'm really going to tell my team to put #not a lawyer on all their signatures. I won't go on my soapbox about the non-lawyer term, but I think what I will say is that law firms contain incredibly smart people, and they're not just lawyers I'm talking about. Like, they're, like Michael said, in my team, business development, like, they're creative types. So the way they think and the cognitive diversity that they bring to projects or they bring to a client is just incredible. And it's not something you get from someone who's doing an M&A transaction as a lawyer. So I think what I'll say is, if firms start realizing how much talent internally is within their walls and start selling that to clients, then wow, 2030 will be extraordinary. Because I think what we're stuck on is this whole legal services or law is the main, and everything else is the kind of periphery stuff. That is absolutely going to flip. And my own firm has been on this transformation journey for a while. We've publicly come out and said we are going to be, or we are, a professional services business with law at its core. So law is the core. We're not getting away from that. But what a client wants and what a client needs is not necessarily always going to be legal services. And
absolutely.
That's where I say this whole colleague thing, where it could be me going into the client for half a day a week and listening to something and someone saying at the kitchen making their coffee, oh, we're really thinking about this. And I'm like, you know what? There's someone internally at our firm that can help you with that. Let me come back to you and I'll set all that up. And then bang, I've got like a tiny project team that might have one lawyer in it, but it might have the IT guy, it might have the forensic accountant in there, it might have my designer in there. So I think this is where this is frightening for some firms to think about. And I know I'm speaking pretty boldly about this, but that's absolutely where we have to be, because clients are demanding that. They're wanting that. And they don't know what you've got in your walls. They just see lawyers. And so how much are we missing out on if clients are seeing you just offering one thing where there's so much more that we can give?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I can give an example of that, it's in the IT forensic space, where it's really great to work with a one-stop shop where you've got, you know, the person who can do that IT forensics and scouring through the systems and finding out what's happened, coupled with the person who knows the legal framework. And that's what we've had a couple of experiences with that, and not having to navigate between two different service providers and having it all in one place with people who know each other and know how to work together just makes things so much quicker, so much more efficient. and you feel like you're getting that well-rounded, complete service in a way that's really easy for us to navigate.
And I'm going to go with a hashtag as well, Michael, not non-lawyer because I've never used that hashtag, but blended services. I'll throw that up there as a term too, because I think, you know, there are a whole lot of other ways of end-to-end services, blended services. I think I actually see the future around where you can provide the legal advice, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that sits around it. Stuff probably isn't a very technical term, but there are a whole lot of other services that you draw from within your organisation that can provide a better client experience, because you're actually looking at it holistically and blending those services. I think now I'm on my soapbox. We as I want to say profession, the profession looks at just the delivery of the advice and the use of time and to provide that legal advice, and we are cutting ourselves off from so many ways of assisting our clients and so many other revenue streams, I think too, which firms can look at. And I would also say ultimately I think that will make for a much better and more cohesive employee experience, where you've actually got people participating in the outcomes for the clients and really putting in that way. So I'll get off my soapbox and see what others think about that as a future.
I was just going to say, I agree with Deb. I think my frustration when I worked inside law firms was that the work that we were doing as a team, which was, I think, highly valued by clients, was always seen as a value add. So because it was never charged, it wasn't valued, which I found somewhat frustrating. And I think, I mean, absolutely right, Mel. I think one of the things when I look at the successful legal partners within PwC Legal, it's those that are part of the whole ecosystem of PwC, and they're the partners who are sitting with the people and organisation and IT and working with the client from the very start. So I'm not finding there's the boundaries that I found in law where the law firm would get engaged in a certain part of the transaction. It does genuinely, I know we say this all the time, it does seem a lot more seamless and integrated because they're in the same walls and they're sharing revenue, and it just seems to flow. Some of those teams are really, you know, embedded from the start, which is refreshing.
Absolutely, multidisciplinary
blended
teams.
Service. Yeah,
and blended services. And I'm seeing it coming up in the chat too. A lot of people talking about multidisciplinary teams being the future for a whole number of reasons. So great to see. So look, just want to flip to the next way of looking at things too. So who do we think is going to drive this change? We might start here with you, Carolyn, from the point of view of clients. Do you think clients are going to really be driving the changes we need?
I think we're starting to. I think that there is a growing voice amongst clients to say that we don't want to operate in this way anymore. We want things to be different. And, you know, I'm obviously curious to about the perspectives of the other people on this panel, whether they're observing that as well. But I think that with the growth in in-house legal teams, I know I keep saying that, but I think that we are much more informed and we are much more confident about saying to the firms, this is what we want and this is how we want you to do it. And, you know, I think I've given at least a couple of examples of changes that we have driven just by saying, no, we don't want you to keep operating in that way anymore. This is how we want it done. Yeah, we'll listen to your objections, but ultimately, this is actually what we want. So go away and work out how to do it. You know, provided we're not asking you to do anything illegal, we'd never do that. But I really do think that this change will be driven to a large extent by the client community, but also in conjunction with those members of the profession, and not just the legal profession, but the people who work with them, who also want to see that change coming, as well as the demographics point that Michael talked about earlier, because firms are going to need to shift and adapt and change to be attractive to those new generations of young professionals emerging from universities, etc. You know, the same old stuff is not going to cut it anymore. If you want retention, if you want the best and the brightest, you're going to have to offer a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Debra, from a large firm perspective, do you think that they're going to be driving this change?
I think they have to. I think it's easy for us to just stereotype the big firms and say because they're large engines, they can't change. But I think that because they are large engines with the resources to be able to change, they should be changing and they should be driving this change. And I almost feel like it's a responsibility of the firms, the larger firms, to change this, because they have the mass, they have the people screaming out for it. And there are senior people screaming out for it, junior people screaming out for it. I think what I find interesting is the people who are against this, they are vocal. And they like the comfort of this has been how it's been for decades, and I just want it to continue. But what I've seen as well is those people will change once you explain to them why this is important. And they might need some examples, show me how this has worked, what has a client said. They always need that data, which is what I spoke about at the very beginning. But you have the data. We have it somewhere where a client has said, like Carolyn, like, this is what we want. And I don't know exactly what we want, but you go and figure it out and come back and give me the solution. So I think it's got to go beyond a slogan internally where we are a professional services firm with law at its core. It can't just sit as a slogan, and we're really big on that internally. We can't just say that but not mean it. We have to get people to live and breathe this, and we have to not stop thinking about this from the perspective of clients are driving this, and you're going to be left behind if you just sit back and think it's going to not continue to change. So yeah, we'll change it. They have to change, otherwise it's going to be forced upon them.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Michael, from a smaller firm perspective, what do you think the role is that the smaller firms will play?
I think the smaller firms have a bit of a unique experience in front of them, because they often have a smaller client base. They can often get their purpose organised and held a lot closer to their chest. So, if we're a team of 25, if I'm pressing a purpose, I can reach and speak to and, address everyone that's part of my team pretty quickly. It gives you that opportunity to be pretty fast and agile and very flexible. It is client driven, absolutely, but I agree with Deb. There's a lot that needs to be driven by big law and large law firms. You have resources and budgets and things that small firms can't do. They've got something to learn from small firms too, because once that ball starts rolling, small firms can test and experience and take risks that large law firms can't. And that's also useful for clients too. They can use small law firms as a bit of a testing ground, particularly because a lot of small law firms are becoming increasingly specialist and having an increasingly, technical focus, as opposed to just, the three-man generalist band. There's really smart people that are choosing to do it in that way, so they can have that agility. So I think it sort of becomes a bit circular. Like clients are pushing this, then big law gets an opportunity to start to taste it. Small law firms can test it and take advantage of that opportunity, and then big law firms can see that the proof's there. We can start to be putting out the data through small firms and some of their successes.
Yeah, agree. Marlo, from the consultant's point of view, what roles do you think? I actually think the consulting side of things and that broadening of the legal ecosystem and the different services providers is a really real growth area. How do you think we can drive change from that perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, being out of private practice and being in a big four and in this sort of environment has given me a different lens to look at the industry, and there's certainly a push within PwC to do things differently in the way we service clients, more than I ever experienced in private practice. And just by way of example, before COVID hit, there was a global mandate to digitally upskill the workforce. We did a big survey globally of CEOs, and there was a recognition that everyone needed to upskill. And so PwC sort of committed to. So, I found myself doing a 15-hour course online during COVID, which I wouldn't have done in person had it not been for COVID, to upskill in, Tableau and Power BI and those sorts of things. So, having different conversations with clients, picking up the point before about, using visuals to have conversations, using data, it's a different lens. And I think when I look at our team, we have some lawyers in our team, we have some non-lawyers. The skills that I'm really valuing in my team at the moment are those change management skills, are those people who can crunch the data and have conversations with clients in a different way. Like, I look at them and I admire them incredibly, and I'm looking to learn from them and extend my wheelhouse. So I think it's just that different lens in this organisation just as to how we service the industry. And I think because other parts of PwC have been more progressive, perhaps, then, you know, there is a bit of a, you know, bit of heat being put on us to work differently, which I think is great.
Yeah, fantastic. Let me throw this one in there. What role do you think educators can play in changing what we deliver and how we deliver it and what we might be doing in 2030?
They have to shift the focus away from that Priestley 11 approach and just pushing that down the, you know, down the law students' throat. Like, there's so much they can learn about tech, communication, excuse me, design, and all those other things, and they should be a core part of the course.
I think one thing that's great that Monash has done is, well, you know, pre-COVID, they were really trying to offer students the opportunity to, you know, do one of their subjects either within a law firm or in an in-house legal team or somewhere else. And I think that that is a really key thing that many of the law schools should be looking at. I'm not quite sure how we're going to absorb all of these law students, by the way. That's a whole other debate. But I think that universities need to move away from that very traditional mode of, I'm going to teach you contract, I'm going to get you taught, I'm going to teach you that, and really focus on what are the business skills that the lawyers of the future, or people who are doing a law degree but might not ever end up being a lawyer, need to survive and thrive in this new world. Because I think, you know, what I find is that graduates, you go through a whole process of teaching them all the stuff that they didn't learn at law school, which you wish they'd really been taught at law school or at some other stage of their education.
I think, Carolyn, too, you know, you do that, well, certainly in my day, which is a long time ago now, you know, do that very traditional black letter law course, and you start in a firm, and your actual lived experience is so different to what you've been taught. So, but we're seeing lots of positive, I mean, certainly amongst my team, and I'm seeing more courses offered at uni, short courses and things for lawyers. You know, one of the partners here does a whole week on sort of legal tech now as part of the University of Melbourne JD program. So there's certainly, I think, a recognition at the law schools that they need to broaden the skills that they're teaching to lawyers. I'm seeing a shift there, definitely.
I think it also gives people the opportunity to choose their journey, and to actually, I'd love to see there be a degree where people can choose if they want to be a legal professional or business, you know, in the business of law, or they want to practice, or they want to actually be able to choose the journey. Surely that must make for more fulfilling careers in the end, when people actually get to stream themselves early rather than get to the end without those practical skills. So my two bobs worth there. I'm also going to throw this in because John has suggested this as well, in terms of it's great that clients in a way are driving the change, but there is also so much potential for forward-thinking and innovative people to be driving the change too. And I think that we have got so many people that are more progressive and innovative in their thinking in the industry. I think we're seeing more people that are vocal about it and prepared to challenge the traditional structures and traditional ways of working and be critical of some of those traditional structures. I think I can put my hand up and say I do that. But I think, you know, we really should be encouraging people to come out and say these things. And I think we're actually seeing it a lot in the younger generation of lawyers, which is a fantastic thing, and we can hear from them and have them drive the change as well. So hopefully there are others who are changing it up for us as well. So I'm going to move on now and just look at some of the areas that we think we might need change, and picking up on the point before around business models, and probably thinking here more around firms. And we've touched on some of these things. What do you think are some of the main changes that need to be made to firms to get us to that point where we're using multidisciplinary teams and we're providing great client service and a more holistic end-to-end approach to our clients? Debra, can I throw to you for that?
Sure. I think my overall view on this is the mindsets that exist within the profession. That's the fundamental thing that has to change. We can talk a lot about what we want to change and come up with loads of strategy papers, and they can go to boards, but unless there is a real shift in mindset as to what the future of this business will look like, then I think that we're going to be still here doing the same thing. And then, as I said, there'll be firms that'll just disappear. So I think it's about shifting people's thinking and getting them to understand that innovation has been here for a very long time. We have to do this. It's not an option. Like, you know, irrelevance is going to be far worse than change. And there's lots of sayings around that. And unless people really see that it's going to be an improvement for everyone, and that's the thing I think is not being talked about enough. Like, what we're speaking about today is everyone's lives will improve if all of this does change. Like Carolyn said, you'll have happy people working in these happy structures, and ultimately clients will be happy as well. And everyone will just be working to make business better and better and better. And I think that's where, if we think about that nirvana, because it can exist, and we have seen that, and like I was saying, the power of multidisciplinary teams, we've all been in that room where that cognitive diversity has come out, the thinking's different, and it's so powerful, and you feel like, wow, I just offered something that person didn't offer, and I feel really valued and respected because my opinion was different, and it came up with a solution that was amazing. Like, we all know what that feels like. And I think unless people know that this can be happening every single day, and it does require people to shift their thinking, because these structures, particularly of larger firms, are very old and they haven't moved, and you know, it's stifling. And I think I've been doing this gig for 20 years now, and like I said at a previous conference, the last 5 years I've seen more change than I did in the previous 15 years. So I really hope that the next 5 years have almost like triple that, because it's energizing. Like, and when you can really see a future that is enriching and inspiring, and ultimately everyone's benefiting, there's nothing more rewarding.
Absolutely, right there with you, Debra. Michael, what about you from the point of view of the structural sort of changes that we might need in particular law firms, I suppose?
I completely agree with Debra. We're not going to get the structural change until we get that mindset change, and we have to have a fair degree of reflection and acceptance that we did not get that right in terms of the culture and the structures we've built around law firms to date. I mean, the data is starting to come out, and it's very clear that once we shift that mindset, once we change some of those metrics and some of those things that we look at in law firms, and I mean, this is again where we can learn from other industries extraordinarily well, that you see dramatic improvement, and you see the business start to shift towards being more client-centric and employee-centric. You know, that whole well-being piece really starts to come to life. And, you know, in terms of changing that mindset, the data's there now. You know, we've got studies that have come, you know, PwC's got some wonderful data, so does a whole bunch of other consulting firms that show those benefits. And I think things like transparency, things like diversity, things like a flatter structure, and that is a structural change for law. You know, how people speak and treat each other, you know, are critical. And, you know, really we are seeing that demise of the structures that don't, or the law firms that don't embrace that they need this change, or don't start to go on that change journey. And as Carolyn's pointed out, the ones that aren't prepared to look at pricing, look at those client-centric models, work out how they work well together, they may not have those clients in 2030. So, you know, they might very well be gone because they haven't done these mindset and cultural pieces that are, you know, absolutely critical. And they make you more profitable. You know, that's the other thing that people don't talk about. There's money to be made off it, and again, the data reflects that. So, you know, you can kind of have it all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of technology changes, Marlo, can I go to you first? Where do you think those changes are happening, and what do you see happening with how it's going to get us to that 2030 scenario that we're talking about?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, again, and I promised myself I wouldn't talk about COVID accelerating things, but certainly just digitalising businesses, and those in-house teams that had made steps towards digitising contracts, putting e-signatures in place, having those collaboration platforms in place before sort of the world shut down a little bit, we're certainly much better placed. And, you know, I was having conversations with clients last year about technology, and they were saying, well, we don't need it because we sit next to each other in the office every day. So we just go over to that person's desk and we talk, you know, we don't need these things. So I think particularly with this hybrid office, and we've talked about that. I honestly don't think that we will ever go back to the 9 to 5 in the office. I think, you know, we've shown that we can work this way. So, but I do think in terms of technology, you know, I said from the outset, I think that whole change management piece is really important. And I've seen some great examples of legal teams just using enterprise technology to show the benefits of harnessing the data and having those conversations, and then using that to build a business case for legal tech. I think going from sort of zero to putting in very sophisticated legal tech can be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, we find that most legal departments don't have any form of a tech roadmap or a digital strategy in place. So it's still a bit of a journey to go on. But I do agree with Deb, there's been a lot of change in the last 5 years, incredible change, which is heartening.
Absolutely. Okay, well, look, we've got...
Can I just chip in on one thing there, Mel, which is, you know, from the in-house lawyer perspective, you know, technology can only do certain things. And to use a real example, relationships that are really key to us, being the relationships with our retailers, we would never default to using a wholly tech-driven solution with that, because we think it's really important that there are close bonds, you know, between the people in my team and their counterparts at the retailers, so that, you know, if there are issues, those can be raised, they can be dealt with pretty easily. And I think you need to be really careful to remember that we are human and we thrive on connection, and a computer, certainly not the types we have now, in 50 years' time they might be different, will never entirely replace that. So be careful where you deploy technology and think about, you know, is this an appropriate use for it? And is there something I'm going to lose by deploying a technological solution?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that, Carolyn, because what I will say too is that maybe our 2030 client will be looking more at human-centered design and looking at how we're actually creating those ways of working with the human central to that, with tech as the enabler. So, yeah, fantastic. Okay, look, with the time that we've got left before we move to some questions, I would love to hear your predictions, and Marlo used the word roadmap, so I'm going to use that. Not that we haven't heard that much, but the idea of, you know, what you all see, and perhaps we can start with you, Michael, as what you see the biggest changes will be starting in 2025, and then jumping to 2030. So almost like a bit of a jump. What are we going to get to first, and then where are we going to, you know, what do you think the biggest changes are going to be in 2030 in terms of clients?
Look, I think the first change I think we'll see by 2025 is going to be a really user experience driven law firm. They're going to be the ones that are starting to see that success. So, you know, I think, and I say user experience, I mean that for employees, for the clients, there's going to be a bit of a shift in how we measure, how we look at what we aim to deliver. And those conversations we're talking about that are so critical are going to become paramount. You know, and then taking that, once we're starting to have those behaviours, hopefully we see a loosening of the rules so people do start to actually, by 2030, be properly multidisciplinary teams across our profession. I think, you know, it's going to take 10 years to get to that point, but I'm hopeful once we're sort of 5 years in the future or 4 years in the future, looking at really user experience, focusing on what people want, and that is still that real human-centric approach. It means that by the time we get to 2030, we're seeing the shift into these broad teams that we're so hopeful about.
Yeah, absolutely. Love your work. Okay, maybe Debra, can we jump to you?
Yeah, I think like I've talked about repeatedly, I do think that the whole colleague idea will be in focus, and I do see that happening as early as 2025. I think that maybe the whole sitting in offices won't come until 2030, but I do think we'll definitely try to start moving towards that, particularly if we're working from home a lot more, which I expect. I think what will change as well, which has already been changing in many firms, is this whole respect for people working within these walls. I mean, everyone operating within a law firm, and I don't think I'm going to be calling them law firms in 2025, but everyone operating within the industry will be respected for their skills, and those skills will be brought to clients all the time. There won't be a divide or a polarization or any of this nonsense stuff that goes on where we just miss opportunities by not putting to the client the best of these firms. And I think that that is already been happening for a while. Like, the terminology is just one aspect of that, but the fact that we're talking and debating the terminology and have been for some time is wonderful, because we are just all legal professionals, or allied legal professionals, whatever we want to call them. We're all operating for the benefit of clients and making everyone's life better. So yeah, I think if firms get a move on, if they haven't started on this journey, they will get there by 2025. But those who haven't, I really think it's going to be a struggle. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to think what 2030 would look like for them.
Without that. Hallelujah. Love all of that. And I hope that that's where we are. Marlo, can I go to you?
I was thinking about this and talking about it with my colleagues, and one of them said to me, so if someone had asked you this question 10 years ago, what would you have said? And how would you have characterized our industry 10 years ago? And I said to him, I wasn't thinking about that at the time, because I was sitting in mainland China, pregnant with my second child, and the only thing that I cared about was getting across the border before I went into labour to have my child in Hong Kong. But I did have a look back, and it's interesting, Deb, when you talk about the last 5 years and how much has happened. Some of the things that I read about our industry 10 years ago was things like, you know, that legal knowledge and tools were inaccessible without lawyer involvement. And I just think about how that's changing in terms of it being much more accessible now. That lawyers regulate the market and police their own conduct, that lawyers compete with each other, really in a genteel fashion, and really undercut other practitioners, that there was no real competition or, you know, to deliver legal services. Legal services were expensive, and Carolyn, to take your point, partners were highly remunerated, that legal tech was just entirely sustaining, offering just more convenient ways of carrying out traditional tasks, but without actually thinking about how do we re-engineer those tasks. So I thought they were interesting. But look, from my perspective, I'm hoping that the industry will just be more data driven. I think that there's a lot more that we can do there. I think we can take a leadership role, particularly within corporates, in terms of conversations around data. There's so much great data that resides in the legal department, and I think the legal departments are in a unique position because they do have that great visibility across the business in-house. And in terms of 2030, I am not thinking about 2030 at this stage either, because if what the last few years have told me, in the last year in particular, then, you know, there's a lot of unknowns out there. So yeah, I'm not looking that far ahead. Okay, great. Carolyn?
I'm just going to start by congratulating us for not having once had to say you're on mute.
Yeah. Or have a cat filter on.
Yeah. Look, I think, like Marlo, I hate to predict the future. I gave a speech to my team last week, and I said, you know, if you'd asked me this time last year what was going to happen through 2020, I would not have picked anything that actually ended up happening. My crystal ball is clearly in need of service or replacement. But look, I think the trends that I see happening, we're going to continue to see this polarisation in the market between, you know, the work that gets done in-house or the work that gets done through some other means than briefing it out to a bunch of lawyers, whether it's through a technological solution, employment of more in-house lawyers, paralegals, whatever that solution is, a self-service option. I think that what that's going to mean is that firms do really need to focus on this relationship piece, because the things that we will need support for will be, you know, the big litigation, the Royal Commission, the increase in regulation, I think, is going to be a huge factor. We haven't touched on it, but I don't see that tide of regulation or the move to increasing regulation changing anytime soon. Yeah, there are a few things that have been gotten rid of, but at the same time, we're seeing things like, you know, the imposition of BEAR and the expansion of BEAR to anyone who's got an AFSL, which includes us, for example, and that the firms who can help us navigate our way through this increasingly complex regulatory environment through a variety of solutions, which is not just the provision of lawyers, but it's also the provision of people who can take a look at our systems and cultural aspects of the way that we're doing things and help us with all of the elements of that, are the ones that will get our business. The accountants do that well already. The law firms have got a lot of catching up to do. So maybe what we'll see in 2030 is that law firms and accountants will merge and there will be no standalone law firms. There you go. There's the controversial prediction.
Well, I'm already seeing no firms in 2030, so we better start working out what's going to look like. if there aren't going to be firms around. I've got an idea of what it might look like, but that's fantastic. Thank you all. Now we've got a minute or so left. I have got a couple of questions here that I'll just maybe in 30 seconds for both of you, Carolyn. You've mentioned responsiveness and good communications. What are the other key advice you give to law firm partners to give you the best service?
One of the things that I am big on is you as a law firm partner get to see a lot of stuff that I don't get to see, because you've got line of sight across a range of different industries and a range of different jurisdictions that I don't have, because, you know, I'm working for a shopping centre company that has shopping centres in Australia. So what I would love to know is what is it they're seeing in other jurisdictions or other types of businesses that might have an impact on my business that I need to start preparing the business for, that I might have no idea about. So thinking about my business, what might be relevant, and using that access to information and networks that you have to help me navigate my role. I think that that's one of the main ones, but also recognising the value that I or my team bring to the table. One of the things we've spoken about is data. Now, if I'm going to work with you on developing a product that's going to make use of my data, I expect value to be attributed to that and that to be taken into account in the pricing model. So not just thinking of a client as the person I'm providing a service to, but actually moving more into that true collaborative space that I've spoken about and recognising the value that we bring.
Fantastic, thanks. And just one other quick question. So Verity's asked, lots of law firms are built around strong branding focus for ideal clients and niche markets. How can in-house teams more purposely create a brand for their team so they can deliver to the new kind of in-house client? Carolyn, that one's for you too.
That is a great question, and that's something that we're thinking about at the moment, because, you know, it can be really challenging as an in-house function to get the, you know, respect or attention or the timely instructions that you require. Part of that is that, you know, we're doing some work around purpose, and, you know, I'm not going to share that with you now, but we're trying to come up with a purpose which is something that resonates not only with my team but across the rest of the business. And there is actually a company-wide piece of work that's going to be done, part of which is going to be looking at support functions and how they are used by the rest of the business. So I think it's about making sure that you've got your champions and your supporters in other parts of the business who are willing to engage. Tackling bad behaviour, etc., when you see it, that ends up being a big part of my role. So going to talk to the internal clients and saying, look, this is what we need to actually be able to service you properly. If you come to us at the last minute with 50 things that you need done by tomorrow, that's not going to work. What we need to understand from you is, you know, what is your pipeline, etc. Are you open to having regular meetings and sharing pipelines, etc. with us? Look, it's a topic that I could talk about for a very long time. It's multifaceted, yeah, and it's something that I won't say that we've solved, but we're focused on solving it.
Maybe that's for another session. Okay, look, we've come to the end of our time and had no trouble at all filling that time. I'd like to say thank you to the fabulous panel, Michael, Debra, Carolyn and Marlo. It's absolutely been a pleasure to talk to you today and to get your insights from so many different sides of things. We also hope that you have enjoyed this session. I certainly have. The session will be available as part of the on-demand program of this event, and it will also be available as a podcast on the CLI and Altma websites after the event. And also, if you'd like to receive updates about these and the amazing work of CLI and Altma, please follow them on LinkedIn, Facebook and Twitter. Finally, I would just like to leave everyone with this thought, and it comes from one of the discussions that we had through this. So one of the things that we asked was who's going to drive this change and who is going to really shape what our 2030 clients looks like and what their experience will be at that time. And I think if you really think about that, we all have a role to play in that. I think we need to think ahead, we need to think differently, we need to think about all of the areas that have been covered this week. We need to think about our people, we need to think about change, we need to think about our business structures, and most of all, our client experience. So reflect on all of those, look at all the great sessions that we've had this week around those sorts of things, and do whatever works for you to change things up and get us to where we need to be as an industry. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.